So hi everyone and welcome to our 37th webinar in this series since we started in September 2020. I'm Sarah Bullock and I work at the Cactus Networking Project, which is based in the Department of Sociology at the University of Surrey in the United Kingdom. Our webinar today is going to be given by Daniel Turner, who I'll introduce to you shortly. There he is, waving hi. But just a little bit of information before we get going. I wanted to highlight a few upcoming webinars scheduled already, and these are likely to be joined by an additional couple before the summer. So keep an eye on our website and our social media channels for information about these as we schedule them. I'll share the link to our website in a minute in the chat. If you're interested in contributing to our webinar series, we're really always looking for people to share their experiences, and we'd love to hear from you. So please do get in touch. All the webinars are recorded, and you're going to be sent a link to the recording of this one. And then you can access all previous recordings as well on our YouTube channel. And I'll share the link to that as well in the chat in a moment. In addition, we've also got some training coming up at the Cactus Networking Project. Some of this is online and some of it's face-to-face. We have a range of half-day courses, full-day courses, and two-day courses that you might be interested in. So have a look at those and at our web pages for more information, and I'll share those in a minute. Thanks. Okay. So let me introduce you to today's speaker, who's a long-standing friend of the Cactus Networking Project, Daniel Turner. Hi, Daniel. Hi. Daniel is founder and director at Qualitative Software. After a decade in qualitative research at various UK universities, Daniel left and decided to develop Qualitative. And Qualitative was founded in 2013 and launched the year after, with the aim to create a simple, accessible software whose goal is to open up qualitative research to more people. And it's continued to develop in various ways over the years. And most recently, the developing team have dedicated some time to exploring how to meet user demand for an automated transcription tool. And this has led to the launch of Qualitative Transcribe. And today we're going to hear a little bit more about Daniel and his team's reflections on how automated transcription can lead to new methods and practices in qualitative research. And I'm really looking forward to it. So thanks so much. Daniel runs workshops on Qualitative and qualitative research more generally across the world. He's written several textbook chapters and writes a regular blog on qualitative methods, which has more than 160 articles to date, and it's well worth following that. So thank you so much for being here, Daniel. I'm going to hand over to you and stop my share, as I believe that's what we need to do to move on. Thanks so much for coming.
Thanks for a great introduction, Sarah. It's great to be here and be invited again. Yeah, it's automated transcription is something that we've been kind of working on for a while, and Sarah said it's something that a lot of people have been asking for, but our users are asking for, but also something I think that there's been a lot of general interest around for the last few years as these kind of different options come around, and also some of the ways that this touches on debates about AI and machine learning and its place in qualitative research. So I'm going to try and capture some of those things as well. Yeah, so my role at Qualitative as director is to kind of look at all these different things, but also I always have my kind of qualitative researcher hat on coming from that background. And what I'm trying to do is understand, yeah, how best to create tools that help qualitative researchers do different things. And transcription is obviously a very important part of the qualitative analysis process for a lot of people. I mean, I don't think there's any kind of substitute for listening to audio as well. You're doing things like interviews and focus groups, any kind of participant observation, things where you might have recordings. But having transcripts are fantastically useful. It's very easy to read through them and to parse. They're really useful for the analysis stage of the process, but they're also really useful when we come to write up and we have those kind of quotes available to us. So one of the things that we kind of found from research which came from the Cadverse network and attendees at conferences is that most qualitative researchers use text representations of their data at some stage of their research and analysis process. So I really wanted to kind of show some of the ways that that's kind of changed over time, some of the things that are changing here, and some of the ways that we can kind of use automated transcription to change the way we think about qualitative data. So, I mean, transcription has been part of qualitative research for a long time. We can always do it manually. That was definitely, you know, for my PhD, I did most of the transcription, typing up myself, you know, giving myself RSI. It was like long and tedious, but you know, I didn't have the money to afford professional transcription services, which is really great if you're able to afford it. And it obviously adds a great deal of extra capacity for your project, and also probably like a better speed of transcription and also better accuracy. But more recently, we've seen quite a lot of automated transcription services. I mean, this is something which has been around for a long time. I mean, services like Dragon Naturally Speaking, kind of transcription systems have been around for a long time. But more and more recently, we're kind of seeing these services become much more widespread, much more accurate, and much more affordable and usable. And even built into things like Zoom and YouTube and Teams. So it is something which is proliferating, but I think is interesting from a methodological point of view. The first thing that I want to stress is that transcription is an interpretive act, and this is a kind of a common trope in the literature. It is an important thing to bear in mind. Transcription is not neutral. We are making decisions about how we hear things. We're often trying to transcribe very quickly. We can make guesses when we mishear things that represent our own biases and our own ways that we have interpreted the data. And although it seems like a transcription should be a complete, inarguable record, there are always things which come along the margins. There are always inaccuracies, and there are always ways that doing that transcription becomes an interpretive part of the process. And a lot of people in qualitative literature want to make sure that that is understood as being part of the process, something that we need to reflect on our biases and interpretations, and that is a part of the process as much as analyzing the data would be. But one of the things that's quite interesting is how the recent kind of changes in accessibility for different technologies changes the way that we do research, and qualitative research in particular. I mean, if we go back and think about things like dictaphone, okay, so I'm old enough in my research career that I started using tape dictaphones back in the day. And those were pretty cheap, they were pretty clunky. There was kind of a limited amount of time that we could record on a tape. It was usually pretty long, batteries ran out and so on and so forth. Then we had the era of digital recorders, which was great because they were a lot smaller, the quality was better, it's a lot easier to skip forward within them. But then, especially initially, the capacity of them wasn't as great, especially if you could swap out tapes on old school kind of tape dictaphones. And then phones just became so good at it. I mean, I do still think that digital recorders, most professional digital recorders, give you better recording quality than most phones do. But everybody's got a smartphone that will record for probably hundreds of hours in a device that the battery, when recording, will probably last all day. And so there becomes like a lot less limit to how much you can record, how often, how accessible. And also certain things like about how much it interferes with the research process. Whenever I've done recordings, you know, the moment you put your dictaphone, your recorder on the table and the red light is flashing, it kind of changes and solidifies the research into, right now it's started, now this is data collection, this is now the formal part of the interview. And recording on your phone doesn't quite have that. And it's also something which, again, it means, as most people have a smartphone that work perfectly well for recording anyway, again, greatly changes the barrier to entry and the way that different people can engage with recording. We can also get people to record their own data and do kind of participant-based recordings just using a standard phone. And that's really interesting to me from a methodological point of view. And the change in prices also kind of changes how we think about this kind of data too. So before, when we're recording audio, we want to have it professionally transcribed. You'll be looking at something like 40 to 120 US dollars an hour. It's a kind of current kind of guideline going rate. It can certainly be less and certainly be more, depending on the specifics of the quality of the interview, how much data, which will be item, and so on and so forth. And then kind of from the last decade, we've had what I kind of see as like the first generation of kind of automated transcription tools, services where you upload a file and probably within 24 hours to 48 hours, you get back a pretty good automated transcript. So they have a server and a computer and some software that's trying to interpret that text. Those systems in general really struggled with background noise, with different accents, with different languages. And because they were kind of really competing with professional services, were pretty expensive. But kind of what I see now is that we're getting to a stage where these services are becoming incredibly affordable. When we launch the Qualcomm Transcribe service next week, it's going to be a fraction of the cost of Otter AI and some of those other services out there. But that, for me, is interesting because it changes how we think about data and what we can collect. If it's easy to record lots of audio and video and to easily get transcript out of that, does that change what we think about data? Does it change what I can afford to transcribe? So does it mean that I can do more interviews or more focus groups because I can have data to go through it? Does it mean that I start thinking about other things around the interview, recording my own notes, my own memos? And those are some of the interesting things that I want to kind of talk about today. Because I think going to a stage where we start transcribing so many different things in qualitative research can be really interesting in terms of kind of triangulation and adding more facets to our research. So the traditional data sources would be interviews and focus groups. We record those and we get a transcript out of them. That's great. And if transcription is more readily available, then maybe we can do more of those. After the interview is kind of my kind of favorite time. I often, if I'm doing an interview in a cafe, I'll sit there for a few minutes and kind of reflect on the process. But I can also now kind of just record my own kind of voice thoughts and have those transcribed as well, so I can have my own notes. And then there's the, with participant consent, of course, I'm going to come back to this idea about consent. For me, there's a lot of times where as soon as I say, right, great, we're done, the interview's over, that's when the participant says the really interesting things. Often there'll be cases where the participant didn't understand quite kind of what you were interested in, or the fact that you were interested in lots of different things. And suddenly they give you a little anecdote about what you were talking about that they may not have seen as formal data, but actually it's really interesting from a qualitative point of view. So the ability to kind of have the recording start, as the participants settling down and you're doing kind of chit chat about the weather, and afterwards really helps maybe capture a little bit more of the data. As long as the participants okay and understands that's happening, then right now we've started the interview guide, now we've started doing the questions. And it can also change the way we do some other kinds of research as well. So a lot of qualitative research, we do things like photo voice, use art, sculpting with clay, playing with Lego. These are all creative methods we should be using qualitative research to give participants different ways to express themselves, but also sometimes to stimulate discussion. So it's interesting to get people to take photos about things in their life that we're interested in. So this kind of photo voice, photo diary type methodology is really interesting. But usually what's most interesting is where you have the sessions where you get the participant to explain why they've taken those pictures, what they show, and why that's meaningful to them. In focus groups, you can use a picture of art or get people to sculpt something out of clay. And it's those discussions about what they've created and why that are really, really interesting. So being able to get that kind of transcription for that data, which can often be very lengthy and often very meandering. And people might just talk about how their hands were messy from the clay for half an hour. But it's really interesting to make sure that we capture anything that they say, which is kind of interesting for our research questions as well. For more kind of like traditional things like ethnography, I think there's also kind of really exciting potentials here. So again, with consent, as long as the participant knows this is happening, you can start to record a lot more things in terms of whether it's a video or audio, just kind of recorded on your phone. I've done a lot of work before in looking at organizational research. So being a participant in meetings and discussions about different things when we're studying organizations and how organizations make decisions and change behavior. And being able to kind of record those meetings, have a transcript of them would be really useful. One of the other things is, obviously comes from there, is kind of participant observation. So kind of you could follow someone around for a day if you're interested in kind of their life and, you know, how they engage with friends or family or people in the shop. And by recording that, you can be capturing a lot more of that. Okay, but why is a transcript particularly helpful in that case? I mean, I can record a day's worth of audio where I'm talking to different people as they go about their lives. But I mean, I'd never really kind of make use of that recording. But the thing about having a transcript of that is it does make it much easier to parse. If there's like only an hour out of a 3 or 4 hour session that's kind of useful and interesting, it's so much easier to find in the text, to, you know, search to find a particular keyword, a particular thing people were talking about, and then you have that data to use for your analysis and discussion later. It can also be used for a kind of own reflection. One of the things I was speaking to my colleague Kathy about is we've both done qualitative research projects where we've worked with people who are, it takes a long time to kind of gain their trust. And we've both done research projects where one of the things that we did with our participants is that we had cars and we gave them lifts places. And we'd have discussions in the car about the kind of things that we were interested in the research project in a very informal way. But there was no kind of formal way to kind of capture those. You know, we were both, as soon as the conversation ended, like be desperately scribbling notes about the different things they talk about so we could discuss them later. But again, being able to kind of record what people are saying kind of informally in lots of other places, as long as there's consent, as long as participants understand that's happening, could be really useful. The other thing which I'm kind of interested in is about how it may enable other people who would normally struggle to get involved with research to become active participants. So people with different disabilities that may make it difficult to write or difficult to speak in kind of formal settings, may be able to kind of record their own observations just with a simple video or audio diary. And people can also contribute spoken testimony. So, you know, if you're doing a kind of, you're working with service users who are using a charity or a project, people can come up and, without having to write a long statement about how much the service means to them, they can come to a session and just say that very quickly, or over a phone call. And that can be very quickly turned into the testimony of text, which, especially for funding makers and decision makers, seems to have a kind of primacy that the audio recording itself might not. And it also allows us to engage more with the wider media. So if we've got people, you know, on a chat show or a talk show or news talking about something, often these things have automated transcriptions, automated subtitles now. And being able to extract that text can make that very easy, much easier for us to engage with as a secondary source of data but also something that kind of connects our data to the wider context and the wider world. And sometimes that's really important for qualitative research projects. I'm also kind of interested in how these kind of automated systems might help improve the process of research. One of the things I thought about is a lot of us at Workos had discussions about, we started recording our meetings and putting them through the automated transcription service because, I mean, we don't have any special access, but you just have so many hours available a month. There's 50 hours a month with our service, but you know, even with the other services, there's so much accessibility. Why not just have the whole meeting transcribed? And it's been so useful on a number of times, yet most of it's not useful. But that thing where we had that one really good idea or that really good way to phrase something, we had captured as text, and then we could email it, and you know the text, the copy is right there. We may even want to record meetings with supervisors, with colleagues, with the research group, if there's a research team where we're discussing something. Recording it and then having the text of that transcript is so helpful to make notes, and can be so much quicker than scribbling notes or trying to type notes during the session and then type them up. So it can be really useful from a process point of view as well. And I also, when we talked about the speed in particular, I'm also kind of interested in how the speed of these automated services might change the way we think about research design, particularly around kind of sampling. When we're doing grounded theory or constant comparison method, most of these methodologies, I'm doing methodologies, not just methods of analysis, advocate for a system where we are constantly examining our data, reviewing it, and using that to inform new participants. So recruitment is being informed by what we're finding in the data. Either we want to speak to people with a different experience, or we found something in the data we didn't expect to be with there, and we now want to talk to a different group of people as a result of that. And when we're able to have those transcripts come back really quickly, especially when we have a professional transcription service, before I've often, for the best rates, kind of sent a bulk, you know, after the interview process or through a stage of the interview process. But having them come back constantly can be really helpful for quickly understanding the different kinds of people that we might need to talk to. So fundamentally changing how we think about kind of sampling methodology. And one of the things that's really fun about these services, like Workos Transcribe, but other ones will work like this as well, is, you know, you can do the recording on your phone and you can have the transcript back on your phone ready to analyze before the participants run out the door. Like, these services come back in minutes, not hours or days. And that really changes how we engage with the data. So even at the end of the session, or even during the session, we can have the text come back and we can start kind of reviewing things, making our own notes on the side of it, memoing, doing analytic writing, reflexive writing, to kind of connect the data very quickly with how we're going to kind of analyze and interpret it, and our own kind of thoughts in the process at the time. I think there are a couple of other things to bear in mind around the transcription. One of them is obviously confidentiality, and protecting the identity and confidentiality of participants. And it's a really important thing with qualitative transcripts in particular, because they're often based on audio, or sometimes even a video recording, where it's quite easy to identify the participant. They may even be referred to or using their own name, the names of friends and family, places, or a particular service that you need to, that they might be saying nasty things about, or very good things, that you need to have anonymized. Before that anonymization happens, that text, that text and the audio and the video is very sensitive. It contains a lot of data that may be very sensitive, especially if you're talking about sensitive topics, difficult topics, and getting it to a stage where it's anonymized and kept secure is a very important part of the process. One of the things is also that I've had issues with before is I've done projects where we're talking about people's experiences with cancer, very difficult interviews about very sensitive, difficult topics. and people talking about emotionally different things, death and illness and trauma. And I've had those moments where you send the transcript, you send the audio file to the transcriber. Interviews where the participant's really upset and has been crying, and the interviewer, I've been crying. And there's a really good article here. In this case, they were talking about miscarriage, about how traumatic it can be for transcribers to work with this kind of data. So there is an advantage to, when we don't have humans in the loop, we can't upset them, we can't share the trauma of the project with them, and it also reduces the number of people who are listening to it. One of the things that was very important in the way that we wanted to develop the Qualitative transcription service is to make sure that it was end-to-end encrypted. That means that the audio is encrypted on your laptop with the password that only you know before it's sent to the server for transcription, and the text is encrypted before it's sent back. So only you with that password can unencrypt it. So no one else, not even us, can intercept that at any stage or understand what's going on there. So it's very important for our participants, for our review boards, to have this kind of circle of trust within the transcription process. But even with all these different approaches, these automated transcription services, I would argue that transcription is still an interpretive act. And now I want to talk a little bit about some of the risks, some of the problems which might be involved in trusting these automated services. So a lot of these come from, just require a little bit of understanding about the way that these systems work. So I don't really like the term AI, artificial intelligence, for this. These services are not intelligent. They don't have consciousness. They don't really understand or can draw kind of meaning from what's going on. They're basically very complicated models based around lots of different algorithms. But they are developed using training data. That is, they need to look at lots and lots, in this case, lots and lots of audio recordings to start to understand how people speak and what sound means for a particular word. How we say words like tomato or tomato. And so to do this, the companies which have developed a lot of this software have basically scraped a whole bunch of training data, mostly from the internet. So in the example of the tool that we're using, Whisper, it's basically trained from data like YouTube videos, podcasts, legal recordings, C-SPAN, Parliament, Senate hearings, anything which has got a recording which is publicly available but does not necessarily mean in the public domain, and has some kind of text which has been associated with it. So someone else has gone through and made a transcription of it before. And also might be TV shows and movies where you can get the subtitles. And one of the issues is that the companies which make these kind of machine learning tools, and this applies for ChatGPT and Bard, and these are the ones as well, they're very secretive about what data was used, probably because they didn't get permission to use it for training these kind of systems. But there's also an issue really here about bias. And it's because this data is trained on basically kind of our world, it has inherent biases which are inherent in our world. It has prejudices which are in our world. And so we have issues where, if you were talking about different things like the way that you could use, you were talking about disabilities, for example, you would have someone say, a system like this might be more likely to say a person with disability can't do a thing rather than a person with disability can do a thing. Because in the training data, people were in general saying negative things or were prejudiced against people with a particular background. Because we don't know what data that was trained on, and because it's likely that that data was used in something which does express the kinds of intersectionalities of prejudice which exist in our culture, these kind of biases can be replicated in machine learning systems too. I'm not saying that isn't the case with our own biases and prejudices, but it's an issue because we just don't know what they will be. These are not reflexive tools. And there are lots of examples going around social media and people who are kind of investigating machine learning systems and talking about some of the issues and limitations, giving examples about how this bias is very much baked into these systems. Here's one of them, which comes from a professor talking on Macedon. And basically what he did here with ChatGPT and Bard was trying to give these systems a sentence where it's ambiguous whether a doctor or a nurse is male or female. And in these situations, the tool will basically is patriarchal and basically it biasly assumes that the doctor will be the male and the female will be, and the nurse will be female. Professor Williams has done the same thing in ChatGPT and shown that it assumes that students will be female and a professor will always be male. So it has very gendered biases within it and prejudices which can come out in the way that it suggests things to people and interprets the data. So this is kind of implicit bias, except it's not really that implicit in this kind of way, but it's still something we need to be aware of when we're looking at these kind of different things. The other issue, this is again quite specific about Whisper as well, is that there was no kind of consent given that people's voices and people's recordings and people's language would be used to train these systems. And in this case, I've got a link actually to this on the blog post which kind of accompanies this talk. The main website's there. But this organization, which is a New Zealand Maori Indigenous organization looking at issues around kind of technology and specifically machine learning, has described these kind of tools as kind of a new wave of colonialization, a new way of demonstrating power and kind of a colonial attitude towards minority languages and minority cultures. And there are serious concerns that these kind of tools can be used to further kind of impress Indigenous communities or used to kind of divide them in negative ways. I'd really encourage people to read all this kind of literature, which is trying to understand the real issues around these different tools. So keeping those things in mind, I still think that it's very useful to have transcription services. And while I'd argue that all technology has an impact on our research in different ways, in general, I think that most people are going to get transcription anyway. And I do think that it's very useful to have, but we just need to keep a couple of the other kind of things in mind that we would always do when working with any kind of transcription. One of those is trying to keep close to the data. So that involves, I mean, even these kind of automated systems, they're always going to involve some kind of correction. There's going to be mistakes and errors. So if we're aware of the kind of biases and prejudices that the systems may have, and other transcribers and ourselves may have as well, we can make sure that we're going through and correcting them. There'll always be particular things like the way people spell names, or the way that people refer to different places or very technical terms will often need correction. And it also means that we can kind of read the data more. I mean, I don't really encourage people to get the transcript and then consider that done. It's really an opportunity to use that correction as a chance to read it again and to read it again and again. I kind of think of this as a time-saving tool and something that should be used to save time so that we can read the data more, listen to it with the audio so we keep that nuance of what people are saying and how they're saying things, like the emotion and all the things which are in the audio or video of the recording as well. But where we've got the transcription with us as well, we can read a transcription quickly. We can read through it again and again, and that gives us a lot of opportunity to kind of read the data with different lights, and see how we can understand that in different ways. I'm also interested in possibilities for kind of wider engagement with these transcripts. A lot of people don't do transcripts for their qualitative data. They prefer to rely on the audio and video. And so I just want to stress that just because you have an automated transcript, that doesn't mean that you have to then do coding, a qualitative coding approach. You can just read through the data, let it suggest themes to yourself. You don't need to formally create those. But the advantage of having a transcript is that you'll have quotes at the end that you want to work with, and you still have those when you come to type up. And so that's extremely useful. I'm also a great proponent of making sure that we can think about when it's appropriate to have qualitative data be ready for archival use, and also for secondary data analysis. So this is putting it in a format where other people can use the research to answer their own different research questions. Now, a lot of funding bodies are requiring that publicly funded research makes not just the findings, but the data that was collected publicly available. There are particular issues about whether that's appropriate for all different kinds of qualitative research. So, for example, if it's a very sensitive topic, we need to make sure that participants understand that it is going to be shared in that wider field. But again, we do not want, it's extremely unlikely that we want to share the audio or the video of this with archives or even other trusted researchers, because that will be too easy to identify people from. Usually the transcripts are probably the best way to do this because we can anonymize places and names. The speaker's voice is not identifiable. And so that's a really good way to share the data, but also make sure that it is available to share. I'm a huge proponent of these archives and secondary data analysis of qualitative research. Things change over time. I was reading a paper quite recently, which was before all of the kind of abortion rights were kind of backtracked on in the States. So rescinding Roe v. Wade, talking about the importance of abortion rights for women. And it would be really interesting to re-examine those transcripts, those interviews with women in this new variety. Maybe speak to those people again, or speak to different people, but re-evaluating, re-analyzing what they're saying and what things are important to them could be really interesting to reframe that debate. There's lots of data which can have new life in other projects. And I think making sure that transcripts are available and can be shared in a way where we can control access and make sure that they are anonymized, and the design from the outset makes sure that we're able to get consent from participants to share in this way, but it can be extremely powerful. And it's something that we should be looking for before we start generating our own data. So I would argue, kind of in closing, that I think all technology influences research. So, whether we've chosen to use Word or a typewriter, it's going to affect the way we write and what we write. Whether we're using qualitative analysis software or we're using highlights and post-it notes, it does change in some subtle way how research is going to be conducted and the findings that we might have. So it would be the same with automated transcription. We need to understand the risks, the limitations with this type of tool, but also make sure that we understand it, the process, and what it offers us, what the risks are, and that by understanding that, we choose that it's appropriate for our epistemology, for our beliefs about research and how we want to engage with research and the wider research community. And that also we document those things so that we are reflexive about all those different things and make sure that it comes across whenever we're writing up results of our data about why we did things and how we did them. We've used these different tools. So I think there are lots of possibilities for kind of changing the way we think about what we can count as data, how much data we can include and cross-reference, including our qualitative analysis. But there are also lots of considerations we need to take into account as well. So make sure that we're doing all these things in the right way for the right reasons, and that we're aware about the biases and limitations inherent in the systems. So I'm writing a couple of blog post articles to kind of tie into this and towards the launch of Qualco's Transcribe. the one with the kind of risks, and it has got all the links to those references about papers, talking about the different problems. That's up there now, so feel free to read that. And I think we've got plenty of time for questions now, which is great.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Daniel. That was a really reflective walk through the considerations around using these tools, and also has brought a number of other issues around transcription more generally to the table. So thanks so much. I definitely had a reflection about this, that kind of from my PhD days, where I had some really challenging supervisions. I had 3 supervisors at the time, and I remember that they often engaged in conversation with each other, quite deep sort of technical conversations with each other about some of the points in my research. And I remember not being quite equipped at that point to understand everything that they were saying, and frantically trying to make notes along the way, and realizing that by doing that, I wasn't really listening. So I partway through thought, actually, what about recording these supervisions? And they said that that was fine. But as you said, I was then left with these sort of really chunky recordings that were really tricky to go back to and pass, as you say. So if I had access to automated, cheap transcription tools, I think that would have made things a lot easier in that instance. So I think, as you say, it's so relevant in all parts of research, not just what we do with the materials we wish to analyze, but also all of the other communications that are happening in the process. So thank you so much.
I remember that too. I mean, I wish I could have done that with my PhD supervisor meetings, because not only their technical debate, but I mean, I only had 2 supervisors, but they were so great at just the memory for like references. They'd be, oh, you should read, you know, Smith and Smith 2019. It's really great on this. And I would just be like frantically trying to scribble it down and not sure if I got it right. But if I'd had that transcription, then I would have had a much better chance at like finding those references.
Yeah, and there's also pieces that are going on there that aren't about the content of what they're saying, but also about how they're interacting with each other as established academics and arguing their point. So that's more about the kind of how the discourse is structured, that teachers, researchers who are learning, right, how to prepare for the viva, how to prepare for difficult conversations. And so it's not just about the content, but also about how conversation is happening. So yeah, really, really interesting. So I had a question for you, which was to do with having an interaction that you're interested in recording, where there's multiple speakers. And when we are using automated, well, not even only automated transcription, also if you're farming the transcription out to anyone, really challenging, yes, to kind of disaggregate and who's saying what, if that's relevant. So how have you addressed that challenge, or how are you trying to address that challenge in your tool, in Qualitative Transcribe? And also, do you have any tips for researchers who are working with that sort of material, for what sort of practices they might put in place during the conversations that could help tools to pick that sort of thing up?
Yeah, sure. So that's one of the things that our service doesn't do yet. It won't at launch, but we are looking at a couple of different systems that will kind of add that on, and we'll be able to add that in the future. It's something that a lot of the automated systems do struggle with at the moment. I mean, someone was telling me that Otter AI, for example, takes time to be able to identify the different speakers, and you kind of have to go back and kind of help it a little bit. So it's something, and the speech analysis field, this is called diarization. I'm not quite sure why, but it's an issue that we've seen some good things working. We're hoping to add that soon. Some of the other tools like Teams do that quite well because they know where the different source of data is coming from. And so if that can be recorded at the same time, they're much better at doing that. One of the other things when I was working with professional transcribers as a tip is make sure that you're using a recording device that is stereo. So one that has two microphones, and you can see the professional ones which have kind of like crossover microphones like this.
Okay.
They're much better for focus groups because they give a direction, like you can hear like the left and the right channels and so on, and the differences between them. And for professional transcribers in particular, that makes it a lot easier to identify and regularly identify the different participants. That would be the main one. The other thing is if you're facilitating the focus group, and you've got a system, where someone's putting their hand up before they speak, you say, "Yes, Sarah," or "Yes, Brian," before each thing, or "Thank you, Brian," at the end of every time someone says something, because at least when you come back to that transcription, you will have within the speech, you've said who it was. That does make it can sometimes feel a little bit forced as the facilitator to do that. But, oh my God, it helps so much at the end.
Yeah. I've also heard of people asking participants to say their name before they speak. So if I want to chip in, I say, "Hi, I'm Sarah," but then again, that also feels a bit stilted if you've only got 4 or 5 people in the group and everyone's spoken a few times. For them, every time to do that is a bit tricky.
Yeah.
But
also the other obvious thing is at the start of the session, make sure that you record the bit where everyone says, "Hi, my name's Brian, I'm from London," because that will help you identify the speaker, or the transcriber to identify the speaker. Also, if you've got that stereo microphone, where that voice in the room is coming from. So that's really help too.
Super. Thank you so much. Ed had a question, which was, can audio be combined with video to help identify source of comment by name, or is the audio sufficient?
Yeah, if you have the video, that's super helpful for that. For the transcriber, because obviously they can see, who's talking and identify the same person again. One of the issues for that has always been like sharing those video files with transcribers, because they're huge, they can be gigabytes and gigabytes. You can't email them. And again, you need a secure way to send those to transcribers. So it can help, especially if you're doing your own transcription, or especially if it's just you that's going to do the participant identification later from a transcript. It's just everyone in one block. But yeah, if you've got it and you've got permission from participants to get video, that does super help. Yeah.
So it's really interesting because we are often here talking about really interweaving the power that these new tools are bringing us, right, for this fast transcription. But we're also always still returning to, well, where's our work in getting that transcript to where we need it to be? And in this instance, not just to do with the content, but also to do with who's saying what. So going through it and doing some cleaning there. That's absolutely no problem. If you need to go, no problem at all. Lots of people saying thank you here, Daniel. That's great. Sophie, who had to go a little earlier on, who might be looking at the transcript or the recording of this a bit later on, was really taken, I know this is slightly off topic, Daniel, by the way that you're presenting, and was wondering what tool you were using. So either you can talk about that now, or you can tell us later if you want to. But
okay, yeah. So I'm using a tool which I often use for when I'm recording workshops and stuff.
Yeah.
But I recently discovered you can just have it send stuff. Zoom sees it as a camera. So it's called Open Broadcast Software, OBS. It's a free open source tool that works on Windows, Mac, and Linux. It has a bit of a learning curve, let's put it that way. But there are some great tutorials around for it. But it does allow you to kind of mix different things together. So I can have the slides. It's basically just put the slides with a transparent background, like over my video. And I actually just have a black sheet behind me. because I find that I've had problems in this room with like the auto blurring and the trying to remove the background being a bit funny. But that worked.
Yeah, nice.
We did have some fun with it initially, but it seems to be working now anyway.
Yeah, it works really, really nicely. I like it a lot. Okay, are there any other questions from any other participants at the moment for Daniel? I have a technical one, which is to do with, you were saying we can look forward to Qualcast Transcribe very shortly or launching shortly?
Yes, launching next month. So within the next couple of weeks. And all Qualcast users will get like I think it's like 100 minutes free. So you'll get a chance to use it. It's an add-on, so you have to pay extra if you need it, but only when you need it. So probably only need it from data collection point of view. It'll give you like 50 hours. That's the kind of thing that changes. 50 hours a month of transcription, which is probably more interviews than you could possibly record, focus groups you can possibly do in a month. So that's why we started thinking about the other things that you could do when you have access to that. And other services allow you to have that much kind of stuff as well. But we're particularly happy with how this system works with difficult accents, with noisy rooms, and when it's just recorded on normal equipment. So we think it's going to be a really kind of accessible tool. And it doesn't tie the data into Qualcast. So of course we can get the transcripts out and use them for other stuff as well.
Okay, nice. And it brings them out in a Word format or in a RTF, yeah? Okay.
Yeah, so you can export the sources straight out as a Word file. If you've done any coding on it, you'll be able to see the coding as well. And you can just copy and paste from it as well. So you can get those transcripts wherever you need them. And we kind of think the end-to-end encryption thing is kind of unique. Like we don't see anyone else doing that right now, but we didn't want to do anything that wasn't that, because I think the qualitative data is so confidential and identifiable. So that's just really important. So it's been a big part of the development.
Yeah, I can underline what Daniel is saying here, and have had lots of participants in various courses asking about automated transcription services that are available and what that looks like from a kind of data security perspective. And I've always had to sort of say, well, and so I think the work that you and the team have done to make it secure is really notable.
I mean, there was a crazy thing about Otter AI like a couple of years ago. A journalist kind of discovered that like their T's and C's mean that they can use any of your transcripts for advertising purposes if they want to. So it just opened this like whole can of worms about, you know, journalists using this tool all the time to do, you know, talk to people, you know, off the record or confidential situations. So you just need to be quite careful looking at the T's and C's about these different services and make sure that your ethics review boards and your IFBs understand what you're doing and where that data might be going.
Yeah. One last question. What about languages?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. So, I mean, it's in general better at kind of like European languages. So it doesn't not support them, but the accuracy rate goes down for more unusual languages. So your mileage may vary. It's better at like German, Portuguese, Spanish, English, and so on. But it's okay at the other ones. Those are the ones which have got a word error rate below 5%, although we're seeing kind of actually closer to 1% with those kind of languages.
Wow, that's really good going.
But it's the other languages will work, but will require more correction. So
okay,
it's also possible to have multiple languages.
Okay, and are the training data sets for these tools being updated all the time?
It's not clear how much that will happen. We're not doing that because we don't want to use the data for anything else. We're not using the data for training. We're not using anyone's data for training. One of the things that's slightly comical about it is that it's not very good at understanding the word Qualcast, because it's a pretty unusual word. So it'll only understand if you're talking about it in the context of qualitative research. So it'll be interesting to see how these tools develop. what data is available, and hopefully if there'll be more transparency about how they're being trained, what they're learning from.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thank you so much. That's been really, really interesting, really useful, and I'm really looking forward to having a play with it as soon as I can. Ed just asked, how does it compare to Zoom's closed captioning?
Yeah, much better with accents. In general, the accuracy is better, but if anybody's got a non-American accent, it's way better. Yeah, than the Zoom one. The Zoom one is pretty quick and dirty, which is useful, but it's quite a lot of work turning those into transcripts. And the same I've seen with like the Teams one as well.
Okay, thank you so much for that. I'm just going to share my screen and just close up. But before I do that, thank you so much, Daniel, for spending the time with us, everyone. I'm sure I speak on behalf of everybody present that it was really, really useful. We were looking forward to having a play with the tool and integrating it into all aspects of our research. Thank you so much.
Thanks for inviting me.
You're so welcome. So if I just could take 1 minute just to say to everyone, thanks for being here. Thanks for joining us at this Cactus Networking Project webinar. It's been great to have you here. And as I said earlier on today, do join us for upcoming webinars if you're interested. And all of the recordings of all of our webinars, all 37 now, are on this YouTube playlist. There's a few other ones around transcription as well. So if you're particularly interested in the topic of transcription, there's at least 2 more that we have previously hosted around transcription issues, and lots of other topics around the use of computers in relation to qualitative data analysis more generally. And the Cactus Networking Project website also has a range of other resources for anyone interested in embarking on the use of a qualitative data analysis tool for the analysis of qualitative and mixed materials. So with that, I will close today's webinar and say thanks again, everyone, for joining us. Thanks so much, Daniel, for coming along and talking to us today. And I wish everyone a great rest of their day and a good rest of your week. Take care now. Bye-bye, everyone.